Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Everyday Conversations regarding mental health. Because there's nothing on the telly, you might as well sit and watch this. It's going to be an interesting one tonight. I've got a couple of guests in. We're going to start off, we're going to be looking at suicide, and that will become apparent while we're talking about that. And then we're going to turn the conversation over to addictions and some of the reasons for suicide. So, what you can do, we're coming live from the Heale Manor, obviously. You can subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost nothing to subscribe to the channel. People think subscriptions, no, it's free. We give you that for free. All you got to do is click the subscribe button, click the bell icon, click all, and you get notified when we go live. However, if you did want to support me, there's a QR code to buy me a coffee. And there should have been another thing to say, buy me a coffee, but it ain't there. I don't know why it's not there. Anyway, Tuesdays. Every Tuesday I do a live quiz. It's an awesome quiz. This coming week, Valentine's. It's going to be a Valentine's quiz. So everything around sort of the 14th of February. What we're trying to do with this particular channel is we're trying to normalise the conversation around mental health. We're trying to destigmatise mental health and just make it easier to talk about. Tonight, like I said, we're going to talk about suicide and addictions. So, suicide is an interesting fact I picked up off the ONS. In 2020, 46,000 people took their lives. That's one every 11 minutes. The amount of people that actually have suicidal thoughts is incredible. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So look, 12.2 million serious thoughts about suicide. 3.2 million made plans for suicide, and 1.2 million attempted suicide. And then you equate those numbers into the veteran community. They're unprecedented at the moment. There are around about 86 veterans taking their lives. I'm not sure if it's a month or a year, but the numbers are large, and it's unnecessary. But we're going to come on to that in a bit. So it's only just recently that the ONS or the coroner's office have started recording whether a person is a veteran or not once they've taken their lives and they get involved. So we're now starting to see the actual figures of when they're recorded of deaths. So I'm just going to say hello to a few people. Evening, Keith, Steph, Cheryl. Welcome, Cheryl. You're all welcome. This is a difficult subject we're going to cover tonight, but we're going to make it an everyday conversation, like we always do. So I'm going to bring on my first guest, and he'll tell you a little bit about why we're going to do suicide this evening, and then I'll show you a little video which then will make a lot of sense. So without too much of ado, let's bring in my first guest.
Thanks, Tim.
Craig, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, mate. Nice to be on here with you, mate.
Great to see you back on here.
Everyone that's dialed in and are dialing in and posting, it's great what Tim does, and these sessions are really, really important. So, I mean, Tim wants me on just to talk about something I'm dealing with at the moment. I'm a former soldier, British Army, 2 Royal England, 2nd Battalion, the Royal England Regiment.
Best regiment in the British Army.
Of course, Tim, of course, absolutely. No one's going to argue with that. Certainly if they know the British Army. But nevertheless, look, the Poachers is the nickname of the unit. We've had some amazing people in it and have some amazing people in the unit right now, actually, of course. It's something you're proud of, and you served your country. There was a particular character that was legendary within our unit. His name was Wallington, nicknamed Wally. Walcott Taylor. Wally to all his friends, to me and to everybody that knew him. Not only was he a great soldier, and he served his country over many, many years, actually, from the 70s right through, certainly into the 80s. He was a stupendous athlete, not just a fantastic athlete, but a wonderful basketball player, boxer, cricketer. I mean, the list is endless. You know, you could go and choose virtually any sport. I mean, bowls, for goodness sake. But the point I make
funny thing, I was up against him in the 400 400 in Berlin. We had a battalion sports day in Berlin, and I was picked to do the 400. And Wally had finished by the time I got to the 100 metres.
yeah, he would have been finished sitting down and with his feet up by the time you got to the first 50. I suppose he was breathtaking. He was so good. This is the point, that he was such an athlete that he became legendary within our unit, within the Poachers. And he was actually picked in the 80s, very early 80s. If you remember, those that know their sport, we certainly as a nation boycotted the Moscow Olympics way back in the 80s, early 80s, because of the troubles. And ironically, as they'd say, because of the troubles in Afghanistan, the Russian invasion, so to speak. And then obviously we sort of went and got involved ourselves, as we all know. But nevertheless, look, Wally was an amazing athlete. He was so good that he was selected for the England team. He was going to be part of the 4x100 metre team. Maggie Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time, boycotted that, along with many other countries. And Wally never got the opportunity to tell everybody and show everybody on the world stage how good he was. And I wouldn't say anything bad about Chris Akabusi. He's wonderful. He's a gold medalist. We adore him. He's ex-military, ex-army. So, but Wally, I'm told, and Chris, don't beat me for this when you see me, if you ever do. I'm told Wally beat you on many occasions. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but many that know tell me that that's what happened. He was very, very good, and I'm sure Chris wouldn't disagree. And he was such a legend that to find out what we found out quite recently was devastating. And I just want to tell you what that is, because it matches the subject tonight and really hits home, certainly to us over in the army and in the Poachers, but to anyone, really, particularly men who were the worst. So Wally was involved in a terrible incident as an off-duty soldier in Ballakelly in Northern Ireland, which is the sort of Londonderry region of Northern Ireland, top of the north of the north. And Wally was off duty. He was a disc jockey. He was the resident DJ at a place called the Drop-In Well, which was a bar. Lots of people frequented it, including Her Majesty's Forces, the Provisional IRA, Irish National Liberation Army, and others. Terrorist groups knew that. They had obviously been watching it for some time. And in 1982, INLA took a device, placed it into that place during the nightclub event that Wally was DJing on, and the device sadly exploded. It killed 17 people and injured dozens, badly, terribly injured. Those 17, 10, I think it was 11 actually, were predominantly Cheshire Regiment soldiers, British Army, died, and then another 6 civilians that were present also died. And there were some catastrophic injuries. Now, if you listen to what I said earlier, Wally was the disc jockey, the DJ. Wally was clearly standing at the front, as DJs do, protected, thank God, by some very large speaker systems and decks. And I think that's probably the only reason that Wally didn't pass that night, along with those poor 17. Wally jumped into his car. This is insane, and I know this happened. He jumped into his car and drove, I don't know, miles and miles, 15, 20 miles, all the way back to the camp where we were based in Londonderry, the city. He had a piece of wood sticking out of his body, his neck, and he had some severe injuries, as you can imagine, but such was his physical capability that he could drive his car, and he did. And I looked out of my window. I was boxing that night, funnily enough, thankfully. Otherwise, lots of our unit that were on lockdown to watch as boxers box would have perhaps been in that place, and we would have probably lost a lot of our poachers, our Royal Anglian colleagues and brothers. So that didn't happen, thank God. But Wally got himself back to the camp. I was looking out the window with a colleague of mine called Marcus Green, and we actually saw Wally arrive. The car pulled up outside on the parade square by the medical centre. Wally came out of that vehicle, God knows how, stumbled across towards the med centre. We looked, we saw this, this piece of wood sticking out of his body, horrifically as that is, it's terrible. And then he disappeared in the med centre. And then not long after, we'd realised what had happened. And then the helicopters came in and we were casevacing and all sorts. So, look, only very recently, I found out that Wally passed, actually. Wally didn't pass from those injuries directly. Wally passed many years later. So that was 1982, that explosion. Wally stayed in the army till sort of the latter part of the 80s before leaving. And Wally took his own life, as we only found out yesterday. So I only found out yesterday, and many of my brothers in the army. Took his own life in 2010. And his son has been working with me and others in the Poachers to try and get Wally a headstone, because from 2010 to present day, he doesn't have a headstone or anything to tell everybody what a wonderful human being he was and how talented he was and how much we adore him. So what we said to his son was, we will get the headstone, and I've organised a collection. We are at a considerable amount of money, but not quite enough at the moment. We have a collection going, and it would be remiss of me not to tell you what the collection is. Right now we are, I don't know if the camera will pick that up, Tim.
Yeah, the other way. Yeah. But
Right,
£3,399.5p.
Yeah, and the account for the collection is, I'll just read it, mate. That camera's right. I'm going to tell you this because it's important. The account name is in POC, Papa Oscar Charlie Management, and the sort code is 403504. It's 403504, and the account number is 327-33773. 327-33773, and that is a direct account that's been set up by myself. And as you can see, we've got about 3,400 quid in there. We want £4,500. We want to give Wally a wonderful headstone that his family are proud of and that we're all proud of as his colleagues. And then we also want to get him a bench somewhere, whether it's at the cemetery, which happens to be in Belfast, where he spent his last part of his life up to 2010. And then we want to try and get him a bench, probably if we can, not in Belfast, but in his unit here, our unit, which is at Kendry Barracks in Cottesmore, which is sort of Leicestershire border. And if we can do that and reach that £4,500 figure, that would be wonderful. But yesterday, his son, completely and utterly out of the blue, Wayne Taylor, decided to send me a post and asked me if we could play that to his army family, his dad's brothers and sisters from the military. And I said, yes, of course I will. I sent that over to Tim, and he's very kindly got that. He's going to play that for you now. And hopefully what I've said to you will resonate, and try not to cry, because I did, and probably still will.
Here you go. Here's Wayne.
Hi folks, a bit of a random video today. Some of you will know me, some of you won't. My name's Wayne Taylor. Visiting my dad's grave here for the first time in years. Well, the first time ever since he's died. Give you a bit of background about him. He was in the army. He ran for Great Britain. He was number one actually in 400 metres. So he had a lot going for him. He was obviously married to my mum, Rose, and was fathered obviously me and my sister Mary. Now, last week out of the blue, one of his old army friends contacted me and had said they wanted to do a sponsorship for to get the gravestone done, because he was one of their greatest sportsmen of all time. So this isn't for about sponsorship. This is just jogged me in my head to do something that I could think that might help save a life or honour him in some way. So you might have noticed, or some people might notice, some people might not. My dad committed suicide, and there was no warning signs whatsoever. He would, anybody who knew him would say he's Mr. Happy, Mr. Cool. All the women loved him. Probably maybe a bit too many women loved him, to be fair. referred to my mum as well. And he was in a relationship, not a bad businessman, X, Y, and Z. So it's just to give you a little bit of insight, just in case you can help someone, or someone's going through a tough time and they think they're making the right decision. My dad, on a Friday night, decided to try and take his own life, and that was by going into a car and putting an exhaust pipe through the window and trying to commit suicide that way. Luckily enough, we found him that night. He tried to say goodbye to me and my sister and my mum the next Wednesday, and we found him in the Shores Bridge. So long story short, I remember driving him back to my house that day night, and this is quite important for people, and he'd already sort of made up his mind that it was the right thing to do. And I remember saying to him, Dad, listen, like, in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best thing to say to him. You're not the best dad in the world, you're not the worst, but I would just ask you not to do this here, because I'll have to tell my mum and sister, and there's better things in life than to do this. So went to sleep, that's okay. In the morning, my sister took his grandkids down to see him in Regimental Avenue, and he seemed fine, X, Y, and Z. And that morning, he went back up the Shores Bridge and carried out what he says he was going to do. Now, the only point I'm going to get across to everyone was that nobody would have known. He was Mr. Bubbly, as it says, Mr. Cool. And obviously in the back of his head, he decided that this was right for him. But realistically, he made a mistake. And it's a mistake that he can go back and fix. So all I would say to everyone is that if you know someone who's a bit down, or even if you're a bit down yourself, you will you won't regret making the decision to kill yourself, because you'll be dead, obviously, but the people around you, you'll leave in turmoil. So what I'd like and stuff there, if it's possible, is for people to share this video. I don't really want any posts to say, hope you're okay, man, X, Y, and Z, because my dad's dead, and that's it. There's just memories, and this is really to be shared for people who might be thinking of doing something stupid, or maybe just to pick up the phone to someone who you haven't heard from a while and give them a wee call. Probably a too long a video, but hope it helps someone. Take care. Thank you.
Well, there you go. I told you that was going to be moving. What can you say, really? Very brave young Wayne there. Incredibly brave to talk about that. And that was the first time yesterday morning that he'd ever been to his father's grave. And when you listen to what I said about his father, what an amazing human being he was, I think you can understand the devastation his father took for a variety of reasons: complex PTSD, depression, combat stress, all of that. I'm not a psychologist. There are other people going to talk on the subject. But it was obvious to me in those early days in the 80s, particularly after the event, that Wally was suffering. We didn't understand it. Lots of us were probably suffering because we'd all seen terrible things, seen our friends die. But the point, Tim, I make here really is that I don't think the British Army was ready for it. They didn't know how to deal with it. Wally had an explosion, not an IED explosion, but a head explosion at camp in the, 87 or whenever it was. And television thrown out the window. And not long after that, Tim, you'll probably recall, Wally was not exited, but Wally left the British Army. And perhaps if we'd have been as aware as we are today, which is the whole purpose of this podcast today, actually, if we had that knowledge that the British Army does have now and still are learning, then perhaps we could have seen where we're at with this guy, put him onto a program, put our arms around him. His mates could have looked after him, all of us, better, myself included. And maybe that wouldn't have happened. But I'll leave that to the experts. But they're just the points, I suppose, that need to be raised. And I'm so grateful for Wayne. He's been very brave. And thanks, Wayne. If you watch this podcast, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult coming to terms with somebody that has taken their own life. And it's happened to me. My best mate took his own life back in the 11th of November 2005, which was really, really difficult. to deal with it for me at the time. We'd only seen him a couple of days beforehand, and he wasn't his normal self. I mean, he was doing some funny things a couple of months leading up to it, slightly out of character. Like I mean, we talked to each other practically every day. Every other day we was on the blower to each other, but he'd just turn up out of the blue. Just jump on his bike and turn up out of the blue, and just wanted to chat. Never really, just didn't see it coming.
No.
And then I got a phone call. We'd just gone to bed. It's about 10:30 at night. His mum rang me and told me that he'd died. And the following day we shot up there. My wife and I to help with Ro and the kids. Unfortunately, they were in the house when he did it. He took a shotgun and blew his into his chest. It was horrible. But somebody that's determined to do it, you really aren't going to see that if they're determined, they'll do it regardless. Like Wally.
Yeah.
There are people that attempt it. It's a cry for help more often than not, and it's really important to be able to. If you're seeing somebody that needs that help, and you ask if they're okay, and if they're really okay, and they start opening up, the worst thing you can possibly do is to mug them off.
Yeah.
If you open up that can of worms, see it through, listen to them, and that sometimes that's all it takes is just to listen to somebody's problems. You're not going to be able to cure it, obviously, unless you're a doobie what's it, a proper psychologist or whatever they are, and even they don't get it right. But just somebody being there to listen to them, to give them a hug, and just to tell them that they're loved, and that's sometimes all it takes to bring somebody back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was not only in the army, I was in the police service many moons ago, and I left in 1999, so it was that long ago. Actually, 87 to 99. I was a detective. I went to many crime scenes, many suicides, dealt with the deceased, dealt with the family, all sorts of variants, from gassings in cars to shooting themselves, killing themselves in a variety of means, taking their own lives. And it's, you obviously immediately you're absolutely broken by the scene that you're dealing with. And you're thinking about human beings. All of my cases were all males, they're all men, young men between probably 25 and 40. All of the ones I dealt with, and I dealt with a lot. But you see these scenes, and there was one particular one where a guy had killed himself. I won't give names for obvious reasons, but he killed himself in the Essex region. It was in a garage. He'd gassed himself in a customer's car, a mechanical garage, servicing. He'd killed himself on his son's birthday. He had a baby son who was, I think, 2 or 3, and he killed himself on his son's birthday. You can't. We look outside, don't we? Perhaps not at that level, and we know we're there. We're a bit down or whatever we might be, and we're thinking work's bad. Yeah. But to take it to that extreme, not just only to kill yourself and go all the way through, but to choose dates and times to do it, you sort of, I don't know. It's difficult. I can't.
It's difficult to know what goes through people's minds.
Yeah,
and it's difficult for those that are left behind as well, because it came to light just recently that his youngest son had carried the guilt for all these years and thought that it was something he'd done, that it was his fault, and it just wasn't. And it just, but you don't know that, and you don't know what's going through somebody else's head. So he'd carried that for all these years, that he thought that it was his fault, and trying to have that conversation with him that it's not, I mean, it was quite difficult.
Yeah. I mean, you saw Wayne there talking.
Yeah,
He hadn't seen his dad. He hadn't been to his father's grave, and that it must have impacted him horrifically, and the wider family. I don't want to get into the
yeah,
personal stuff, but you saw that release yesterday on that video when
yeah,
he'd seen it. It must have been very difficult for him and draining at the end of that. And I did communicate with him yesterday and this morning, and I'll give him a bit of space actually, because he clearly must now need it. But again, I'm at this stage where you're thinking, do I just say, look, Wayne, give me a shout. Come on, let's have a chat. Come on. He lives over in Northern Ireland, so I'd love to go and see him. And these are private things. I'm talking about them, so I'm conscious and careful. But you worry, and it's that. This is what we're talking about. When you're worried about someone, as I am now about him, I've probably got nothing to worry about Wayne, of course. But because I'm worried, and I am that worried, I think the point of this podcast is I have some duty to at least reach out to him now and tell him that we care about him. I don't know him. I've never met him. I've had a few comms with him, as you heard, but right now I own a little bit of him, in a sense, in that I am someone who he can talk to, and I'll ring up, and tomorrow I'll call him, and tomorrow I'll chat, and I'll speak and make sure he's okay, and tell him that I'm available, and I'll listen to anything he say. He may not want to say anything, and I know it's personal chat, but I just, that to me is an example of how I process it as an ordinary person. What I think I should do, what I own.
Yeah, if you could pass on our best for him, and we're with him. We're with him every inch of the way, and he just needs to reach out. He's part of the Regimental family. So,
that's what I told him. Yes, I told him. Yeah. Well done, mate.
So I'm sure the regiment will jump in as well if he needs it.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be, there's going to be some catharsis. There'll be something there that hopefully will heal and help for him to come to terms. I mean, we're talking not about the individual that does this. We're talking about the family, as you say. So for Wayne, I think, I'm hoping that as we go take this journey together and we get the headstone that Wally, rightly deserves for a number of reasons. And he starts to think his son about it, and others, Mary, the daughter, the other sister, and the family. And hopefully, I mean, my fingers are crossed, hopefully that will bring something that's positive to their lives, and they can have a really good memory and reflection of their amazing father. And that's all we can pray and hope for. And that's all I hope for.
Absolutely.
Coaches are right behind me, so all good.
Yeah. So we've been getting some quite good messages in the chat box. I've just got a troll just come in. So there you go. We've got evening, Nigel. Say Cheryl's it. Oh, I've done it again.
Brackers, great bloke.
Yeah. Who else we got in? Catherine's in.
Catherine, yeah, bless her.
Keith's in. Brian's in.
Wow.
Valletta's in.
Valletta, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got quite a few. Jonathan's in. So Steph's in. So we've got lots of people watching. There's quite a few people will know him. And so Catherine said that she remembers that sports day in Berlin.
Oh God.
Yeah, I was on the 400 metre line looking across at Wally, and I think, I'm going to get you today. And the gun went off. And I got to the first corner and he's finished.
I was in the boxing team. I trained alongside him, so I feel your pain, mate. I feel your pain.
You didn't want to step in the ring with him, that's for sure. He had some pretty quick hands.
Yes, he did, yeah. And feet.
So, I'm going to move things on slightly. We're going to now look at addictions, and the bit about addictions we're going to look at is how they can manifest them into somebody taking their own life, which is quite often one of the causes why people do it. So I'm going to bring in my next guest. So welcome, Joe.
Hi, Tim. Good to be here.
How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well. Coming to you from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in
Brilliant.
the U.S.
Yeah. Gone
So,
midnight.
so I met Joe the other day on the podcast. He recorded his life story on my podcast, and off the back of that, from what he's doing nowadays, I thought it'd be great to get him on to talk about addictions. So, Joe, if you want to just tell us a little bit about what you're doing nowadays and how you got involved with helping people with addictions.
Sure. I'm a coach at a place called Faces Together, based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we help people not only in our neck of the woods, but also really around the U.S. and Canada. We've had clients in the UK and in New Zealand using the internet. During COVID, we became very good at doing that out of necessity, and had people really from many parts of the planet coming in and helping. What peer coaching is I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed psychologist. What I am is somebody who has been in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction for the past 14 years. And what the idea of peer coaching is about is not really any different than what you're talking about when you have uh, veterans speaking to veterans. And that is, if you think about it, exactly the same thing, where you have people who are talking to people, number one, talking, but number two, talking to people who understand, who have been there, and who understand the uniqueness and the complexity of life during service and life after service. We do the same thing, except we're taking people from, including veterans, but from all walks of life who have some problem with a substance and who are looking for help and don't know where to turn. In the US, there's a big problem of the amount of time that it takes to get to talk to somebody if you fear that you have an addiction problem and maybe don't know why. And there's a lot of reasons that can happen with that. You've talked with, being in war zones, the trauma that's involved, extremely powerful, extremely complex, severe mental illness, also in there, schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder, very complicated things. But I find underneath of many addictions is that we use them often substances for treatment, really, in for something else, and I call that the why underneath. And alcohol and drugs tend to be a very treatment that doesn't work very well, and of course comes with lots and lots of side effects. So it's really that conversation with someone who understands what you feel like, where you are, what you may be battling with, and who, if we need to, can escalate that care or really kind of triage that care to professionals that we also work with here in where we live in South Dakota, and with other connections we have around the country.
Brilliant. So that's where we are. So, how many people that come through your door have got a serious addiction problem with whatever it be, whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, have thought about taking their lives?
It's unfortunately very common, and very common to have our people who come through have attempted. And there's a lot of complexity that goes into that into suicide too, with attempts and what have you. There's, you never want to say that everybody is certainly the same, because they're not, but there are so many connections between trauma, between some things much simpler like lack of communication, relationship issues, um, a lot of times mental health, anxiety, depression. See it. I bet there's 80% of the people that we see will come in and say they suffer from addiction or from anxiety and depression, bipolar disorder. A lot of things that take people off of their normal plane. And some of them who come in are brand new to any kind of help. And they, have seen our advertisements or heard on media, things like this, who know to call us. There are others who have tried everything under the sun and they haven't worked, whether it's inpatient treatment, what they call intensive outpatient treatment or IOP, that's what we call it here, or AA and other things like that, that they just have not connected with someone. And connection is such an important thing in the U.S. and I'm guessing everywhere. Um, we have an epidemic of loneliness where people will be in a state and they isolate themselves. They don't connect with other people. Uh, I always find that I always say smart people who uh, are isolated and are bored are in a bad situation because things don't change. We start to live in our own heads, and often very drastic things can happen. So what we try to do is to at least give that starting point where they have someone that can help break that isolation and can start with conversations and with someone who understands A, the problem, and B, who might help guide them through some of the solutions or some of the places to start so that they start feeling better. Uh, we often, there's a lot of sayings in this business, but one of them that really sticks with me is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And I know that's what you guys are talking about with that connection between peers, people who have had that experience. And it's the same with us in variety of walks of life. That's why all of our coaches come from different areas and have different experiences. What we try to do is to match up people who are having problems with someone who can understand those problems, and we start with conversation.
Yeah, I mean I think connecting with somebody and talking things through can help a lot. But I think the first step is to recognise that you've got a problem. Once you've made that realisation that you've got an issue, then the way forward is to take the first step.
Absolutely. It's the hardest part is to
Yeah,
make that first step. Uh, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. We have the same thing in this country that you have in yours. So much stigma and really ignorance about mental health and
yeah,
about situations like this. If most people know anything, it tends to be misinformation. Uh, Mental health is not something that was talked about. I'm 62 years old. It was never mentioned in the society and where I lived, which was a small farming community in Minnesota. You never mentioned mental health. You never mentioned things like depression and anxiety. And so you could have people who were fairly worldly, educated, well
yeah,
traveled, street smart, a lot of things, and had absolutely no clue that they may be suffering from uh, some kind of a trauma or mental illness that could lead to these sorts of problems. It's
mm,
much easier to have the stigma that, well, they must be of low moral character, or, honey, if you loved me, you'd quit. And things like that. And it's a much different approach when you think about it in those terms, much like it's not that much different from being treated and diagnosed and treated for cancer or
mm,
diabetes or something else that will affect your life. It just happens to be often connected to how you think and how you
yeah.
may not be thinking in a healthy way.
I think that so stigma is the big one, and I think for decades and decades, for years, it's always been looked upon as you shouldn't talk about it. cover it up, push it under the carpet, forget about it. And it's only now that people are starting to realise that everybody, sooner or later, will have a little wobble, will have some sort of, what's the best word to use? A slight
Crisis.
issue with their mental health. I had it a couple of years back, and it's funny. There was back in November. The census. We had a national census came out, and one of the questions on the census is where are veterans. So where I live is the highest concentration of veterans. Now, the group that I go to, Veterans Outreach Support, the CEO came along to our meeting place where we have tea and stickies, and they had a camera crew with him to sort of, this was going to go out on the evening news. Unbeknown to me, it was going to go out on the national news, not the local news. So it went out on the national news at 6 o'clock. I got talking to him, and they decided to pop round to where I am now in my studio and record a piece for me. So we sat and done about a 20-minute piece, of which they used about a minute and a half of it. But that minute and a half was me saying about, I had a bit of a problem a couple of years back. Got hold of the doctor. I realised that I was having problems. Got hold of the doctor. He referred me on to the specialists. I had, I think, about four or five visits with the specialist mental health team. Unfortunately for me, they weren't able to help, and this is what I put across, because they hadn't been in the military. They didn't understand what I was having, the problems I was having. And I ended up talking to some mates and sorted it out. So I'm a lot better now, so don't have to worry about me. But I said that they were really good at what they did, but they weren't able to help me because they didn't understand my issues. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think this is where the peer on peer is such a great thing. I interviewed some guys a few weeks ago from Forgotten Veterans UK, and they do this peer on peer, looking after veterans that have got real complex problems and stuff like that, and they help them. They take them into this fort, and they work with them, and they give them lots of help. It's amazing what they do with them. So I think the peer on peer stuff is probably a good way forward. There's another group that I was talking with a few weeks back, just along the coast, that do pretty much similar, but they got veterans that work with disaffective youth, and giving them some help and bringing them along the way and trying to help them be better citizens. And that's all peer led as well.
Yeah. Hey Joe, just something
let's bring you in there. Hang on.
Yeah.
There you go. Boom.
Question for Joe really, and his thoughts on this. It's quite enlightening when you hear this, because I worked on this with Network Rail, which are our sort of infrastructure for rail, obviously over here in the UK. So they were suffering, and still are, huge amounts of the obvious suicide on the rail track in a variety of scenarios, but hundreds of people every year take their own lives or severely injure themselves. And so much so was the problem. It was, not only was it the nightmare of the individual and all the trauma that's caused, but then typically they've got the financial heads on as well, and they're looking upon it in the financial sense, the millions of pounds it costs. So I think that was probably, if the truth be known, and I also wouldn't say that about Network Rail, that might have been more of a driver than the real issue. But this isn't about identifying people that are vulnerable, approaching them and dealing with them before they get to this stage. This is at the very end, where they're about to, or they do, take their own lives using a bloody train. So we decided to work with Network Rail. My company does CCTV and access control and facial recognition. And we asked Network Rail whether they'd be interested in running a pilot with us. The pilot was very much to work alongside mental health trusts, where we know we've got extremely vulnerable individuals, and to seek their support to engage in a facial recognition issue solely around rail sites that are well known for this type of activity, for the jumping and the suicides. And we got buy-in at very high level from a particular mental health trust, from a wonderful guy actually, who got buy-in. He said if we could seek the consent of the family members that obviously are in control in terms of ownership of their life and authorities, then if we could get right off an agreement, we could place their anonymous faces into key technical equipment at jump points, train station sites, and at least we can, have alerts on those faces and know that they are individuals that are suffering, and that almost certainly the high top 10% of those mental health patients that are likely to try and kill themselves. And we got very close to rolling this project out. Network Rail then went further than that, actually, in a sense, and trained up thousands of their staff at each of their rail sites across the entire UK using a variety of training through a well-known organisation. And that training was basically looking at individuals, looking at them as they approach platforms and walk through train stations, looking at the demeanour, looking at the shoulders down, the head down. They're the individuals that go to one end of the train platform, where the others, all of the rest of us, normal people, without the mental health breakdown and the crisis, are going to get from A to B. Well, these people are going to stand at the right place to jump in front of the train. And it was the ability to see all this, recognise it, and then try and intervene. And the Samaritans organisation trained all of these people across the UK. They've intervened with a multitude, hundreds of people that clearly were there. Whether they were going to do it then, they were there to do it, and they've also intervened with people that actually were about to do it. So it's been a breathtakingly successful programme. It's still ongoing, and we're hoping, our business are hoping, that Network Rail will come back on that test case, that model, that proof of concept, and work with us to see if we can get that facial recognition piece in. Not to monitor everybody, but just to identify those individuals that we know are vulnerable, and that if we can capture them, 1 minute before that train arrives, then that's a life saved. So that's just an interesting point, really, for this discussion. But it's at the wrong end of what we're trying to achieve here. We want to intervene, identify, recognise, talk, and counsel in a sense. So I'll shut up now and just thought I'd throw it.
No, the point you make is very good, and yeah, you're exactly right. All the things that we talk about can and often are related in a process, and one person may come in with one or two or three different things, and they may share that with someone else. But a lot of them, what they have in common is possible trauma. They have isolation, and it's culturally. I mean, just as an example, and I'm sure it's this way in your countries as it is in mine, that men, let's talk men especially. What are we trained to do? What models are we given when we're young? Number one, toughen up. Don't complain. Don't crab about things. If you're going to fix yourself, fix yourself. That you should be able to do that. Don't bother other people. And for God's sake, man, don't talk about anything, especially that involve feelings, or something like that. It's all of these messages are what we're brought up with, that this is what a real man does. And it's, it's what you find out over time is it's almost exactly the opposite. I'm a big believer in helping people think of things in terms of building your team, and which is the opposite of isolation. When they come in to see me, if they like it or not, I'm part of their team. If they have a spouse who may not understand exactly what's going on, but you both want the same thing. You both want sobriety and to get trouble out of the way. Well, you share a common goal. That's what we do on teams, is we work on that together. It may be somebody on your healthcare team. It may be friends. It may be family. It may be people who have shared experiences like you do. So that, when we think about it, we're not alone, that we have people who have things in common. And sometimes just the simple act of talking something out, I remember a young man I had. He was probably about 22 years old, and he came in and he was kind of quiet uh, to be there, and was really didn't know exactly what was going on. And we probably met 2 or 3 times before all of a sudden it was like opening a water spout, and it came out, and he talked almost straight, and he stopped and he gave a big exhale, and he said, "Who knew it could feel so good to talk?"
Yeah.
Now, you look at that and you kind of, you think about that. It's it's like not only are people dealing with problems, they're also dealing at them with from a disadvantage, because
Mm.
everywhere they turn, there are signals that say don't, that's
Yeah.
bad. I had a client who told me, why didn't I asked her, why didn't she seek help? She said, I got tired of going to the doctor and being told I was crazy. I didn't want to hear the word crazy anymore. Language, all the things that go into
Mm.
that seem to get in the way of people trying to seek help. And that's one of the things that we try to do, is that it can be such an easy start.
Yeah.
We see people and talk to them within 24 to 48 hours. Which is a lot different than a lot of times you'll call a health professional. And we're just so understaffed, even, in this country, that we're so glad you've come to your moment that you can't do this by yourself and you want help. We can see you in 2 months,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and you're
crazy.
hanging on by your fingertips for
yeah,
and it's, I remember when I made the call, it was like, no, you don't understand. I'm having my moment right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so, it's the point being is that, all the different ways that people seek help, um, is that we always do better when we work together.
mm,
I know
Yeah.
that there are things as a peer that I don't know much about. I don't understand heavy duty trauma, especially if you were a child and had some
Mm.
kind of a trauma. I don't understand schizophrenia. That takes medical professionals. But what I can do is, when somebody comes in, I can help guide them to somebody who does know things.
yeah,
Because
Yeah.
when we hide the problem, we also don't talk about what do you do if.
yeah,
And
Mm.
so sometimes we act as a clearinghouse. Sometimes people will come out of treatment
yeah,
and they want to keep
Mm.
going and have what we call aftercare. And
yeah.
so again, somebody who's been there before and who can help
Yeah.
with the process, because it doesn't stop just after that.
Do you know, Joe, I was listening to you earlier
Well,
talking about
just could I
young
make
men.
a quick,
Sorry, Tim.
quick, quick suggestion? Anybody watching tonight, if want to ask a question, just pop a Q in front of the your question, and we'll see if we can answer your questions for you. So if you want to ask any of us a question, please pop it in the chat.
Yeah,
Off you go,
cheers.
Craig.
Yeah, Joe, I was saying that was interesting what you were saying about the programming, the pre-program of the male. That whole concept of be strong, look after yourself. Or you can imagine what that must be. Those that have never served in the forces. You take all of those things you said earlier, and then you put a huge magnifying glass on it and zoom it all out even further and bigger. Because if you, particularly in the infantry, the real core front of the arrowhead,
Mm-hmm.
as guys, the macho troops, I suppose, the reality of the role doesn't necessarily is the reality of the actual human or the situation, but that is really important. I was sort of thinking that as you were saying it's so much more magnified in the infantry as a soldier and the forces, and it's difficult for soldiers that have seen experienced terrible events and incidents because they won't
Mm.
talk about that and they won't. Our team and our poachers and all those. We've got some great people, far better than me, that understand it and say things that are
Mm-hmm.
really wonderful poets and all sorts of characters in our unit. We're very blessed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is
You know,
starting to come through and has for the last 18 months, Joe, that message about, put your hand out,
Yeah.
talk, say a little bit. And, that pre-programming, as I say, is magnified so much more in the military. So it just means it's
Yeah.
more difficult, perhaps, in the
mm-hmm.
infantry, in the army and the Marines and Navy or whatever.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
So
I
Catherine's
know.
made a really good point there. Since losing someone in my family to suicide, I've always said it doesn't end the pain, it just passes it on to others.
Yeah.
And that's right. I mean, the pain may have stopped for the individual that's taken their life,
Yeah.
but the amount of pain that they leave behind, because we've had such a stigma to suicide in the past, the pain is probably a lot worse for people that's left behind from somebody that has taken their life than it is for somebody that's died from something else.
Yeah. I think we saw that with Wayne, didn't we, earlier? That was the whole,
Yeah.
you know, trauma there in the face and the expressions and the words. So it is terrible, absolutely. And I haven't, you know, I can't imagine what Catherine and others have been through. But
you know, it's an interesting phenomenon. I know here in the U.S. and maybe where you're at too, is that when an obituary was written, and of course, if someone and you saw the numbers, I mean, there are people who are dying from suicide every day, large numbers of people. And in the obituary, we're talking about wonderful things, but we don't ever mention maybe the cause of death. If a person had cancer, they would probably, you know, it very well could say that after a long battle with cancer. Well, you know, that's, if you're going to start breaking stigma, just my opinion, but if you're going to start breaking stigma, you have to break it in a lot of different areas. And, you know, to start this with a conversation, it's not something to be embarrassed about. It's not something to that puts a bad stain on a family. It's just another way if parts of you are not working right. And, you know, I often will do this, you know, I'll say that, let's say you're walking down a sidewalk, you fall down, you break your arm, and it's a compound fracture, and there's blood all over the place, and you're in great pain. You can go through your mind and rationally say, I know what I need to do. I need to get to the ER like now, the emergency room right now.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if it's your thinker that's not working correctly? Anytime you think, if you're a person who's a problem solver or a person who has, you know, solved problems by thinking them through, all of a sudden we, you know, if our perception of the world because of addiction and whatever the causes were are not, you don't let you use, you know, if your brain's not working properly, then what do you do? And if we aren't helping each other by normalizing, for lack of a better term, the fact that people do have troubles, people do have mental health issues, people do have trauma in their life, that if we don't normalize it and we don't talk about it, all we're doing is slowing down the process of helping people.
Yeah. I think there's the great saying at the moment is it's okay not to be okay. And I think if we can push that message, if we can destigmatize the people have issues all the time. Everybody that's in, doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, if you're put under immense pressure at work or self-induced pressure, you can have a wobble. You can have an issue, and
of course,
and
you know, short term and long.
And because everybody does it, and it's been sort of keep quiet, then it's time not to keep quiet. It's time to get it out there. Let's make it an everyday conversation that people can have without feeling embarrassed, and be able to get the help, early help, ideally. I mean, it's what we do now in the military with trauma. If you, for instance, on an operation, you're involved in a traumatic incident, you got a bomb blast, people had lost lives, lost limbs. There's a process the military now use called TRIM, which is trauma incident management. They go in 72 hours after the event. They'll assess everybody that was involved, either directly or indirectly. They'll work out who needs to have a one-to-one or a group or an overall brief of what's happened. They're assessed. The team will come back in sort of 30 days later to see how people have coped, and to let them know that it's not unusual to have the sort of feelings that they're likely to have. Reassess them at the 30-day point. If they're having troubles anyway through that, then they can signpost them on to some professional help, and then they go back in at the 3-month point to do a final assessment to see if everybody's coping okay and able to move on. The problem that's a great thing. However, when you're in, say, a forward operating base or a forward patrol base, and you're having multiple contacts, multiple major incidents day after day after day, that's when it becomes a bit more of a problem further down the line. I think we're sat on a powder keg with Afghanistan veterans, and I don't think they were all captured because of that stigma thing, and you have to be tough and all the rest of it. And I think they have missed those crucial early days of intervention, and because they only do, a guy who will join the army, do 4 years, do one operational tour, and then leave, and get on with his life. If they'd had a pretty tough tour, some years down the line, that's going to catch up with them if they haven't dealt with it. And we're still seeing veterans now from the Falklands, and I saw a study about it. There was guys that came back from the Falklands on the aircraft and were big heroes at the time when they're getting off, and then the others came back on the ships, and they had sort of 2 or 3 weeks coming back on the ships, and a big parade when they arrived back. The guys that have flown back have had more issues than the guys that came back on the boats, and they reckon because they coming back on the boats they had time to decompress, whereas the guys that were flown back within sort of 24 hours of leaving the battlefield haven't. And I think that's one of the crucial things.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fact that as a layperson, I've often wondered is you mentioned it's traumatic. It can be traumatic enough to have one tour. Well, I know here in the U.S. what happens when you're redeployed a second time, a third time, a fourth time, the cumulative effects that come out of that. You know, I would have to believe it's not just cumulative, it's geometric in its effect of things that go on. And you know, when I'm from the addiction field here in the U.S., just a quick fact, you know, if you're having these kind of problems, you are not alone. We figure 1 in 4 people or 1 in 10 people in the U.S. have 1 in 4 has somebody in their life that is having a problem. And that's one of the things that we also do at Face It Together, which website, by the way, is wefaceittogether.org. wefaceittogether.org. That we also we have developed a program that we work with the people in the lives of people that are having trouble so that they can start to build their team, so that they can build a better process of working things through. Because if a person is suffering from trauma, mental health issues, addiction, what have you, it not only affects them, it affects everybody around them.
Yeah. So Joel makes a good point there that it does sometimes come down to the medical staff, whether they take you seriously when you're letting them know about something. And Catherine, Stephanie also makes a point about the police that are dealing with multiple issues day in, day out, and they're not robots.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It's
I've woken up many nights thinking about a young 18-year-old baby girl that I dealt with. I was a detective. I went in. It was considered a sudden infant death syndrome. Since my job as a detective was going to make sure there was nothing suspicious, and the officers that originally attended, the uniformed guys and girls, just weren't happy with what they saw on this terrible morning. And we went in and had a look at this little girl, and I won't talk about the details, it's too traumatic to even share with people. but the child had been severely hurt and drowned in the bath the night before, and then planted effectively in a situation where she apparently died in her sleep, which clearly was not the case. But that's haunted me forever. And I know the girl's full name, date of birth, and this was 25 years ago. And I've dealt with many incidents and all sorts of weird stuff as a policeman, let alone seen things in the military. Yeah. But I've got, and this is my diffusion, is I've got the most amazing missus. My wife is breathtakingly brilliant. She listens and digests and talks and doesn't interfere, and she's brilliant and always has been. And I genuinely believe I'd be an absolute, with the greatest respect, fruitcake, mental health crisis on legs, if it wasn't for her defusing and talking to me about the many things I've dealt with. So no, that is critically important, that piece where you talk and listen and you've got someone to talk to. But if I didn't have her and I was playing Mr. Macho and didn't want to talk to anyone about the things I've seen and done, maybe it would be a different story completely.
And I think that goes the same for all of us. I mean, I've seen and done some horrific things.
Yes.
On operations and it's amazing I'm as sane as I am.
Gentlemen, I have to leave because I have a client to meet with right now.
How timely, we're coming to the end of the show anyway.
Yeah.
It's about 1 o'clock for you, isn't it? Not, I said again midnight, didn't I? But it's not.
But it's not 2 o'clock. But yes, but thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. And again, it's very obvious that what we're talking about crosses borders. It crosses everywhere. We're talking about human beings here. And I just will mention one more time the website, which is wefaceit.together.org. And no matter where you are on the planet, if you're seeing this, and I guess in the English-speaking world, but our coaches right now are English-speaking, but feel free to go online. You just fill out a very simple form that says, hey, I'd like to find out more. One of our, what we call our first impressions team will talk to you and assign you a coach, and we'll just get underway. So again, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
God bless.
Thanks, Joe. Is that it? Have I got it right?
Yep. wefaceit.together.org. That's all you got to do.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Thank you.
There you go, Craig. So,
well, that was good. He's good. Very, very good. Yeah. Very knowledgeable.
I think we've had a really, really good conversation tonight. I think it's worked really well, and I think if we've helped one person, then to seek help, then we've achieved the aim.
Yeah, I'm definitely here. I know you are, and anyone out there that's watching is having a nightmare, a meltdown, a crisis, just wants to chat. Utterly 100% confidential. You've got my details all over Facebook now, certainly in the military regime and the arena, but anyone can get hold of me at any given moment and talk to me. And if I can help, I will. And I'll definitely do what that man told us, Joe. If I don't know the answer, which probably will be the case, I'll definitely find someone that does and help.
Yeah. And I think that's the real key message to take away is if you do open that can of worms and you listen to somebody, and the way forward is to point them in the right sort of direction to get that help that they need.
Yeah.
Where am I? So, thank you so much, Craig. If you want to hang around, we'll just have a quick wash up after.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
And
thanks to everyone that dialed in and have commented. It's that's nice to see.
It means a lot for people to take the time and effort to watch. So, end of another show. Hopefully, you found it interesting. Hopefully, it will give you a little bit more insight into whether you want to help somebody, whether you know somebody that is kind of struggling, and hopefully we've given you an idea of what to look for and how to help. Or sometimes all it takes is to give one of these or both of these and less of that, and if their problems are complex, then point them in the direction of a doctor to start with, or a healthcare professional that can help. So don't forget, next week I've got a guy coming on. We're going to be talking about the Lee Victory Festival, and the kind of spin that I want to put on that is the agencies that are going to be there at this festival. It's a lot to do with military stuff that goes on, obviously Victory Festival, but they also have lots of the different agencies, like, I know, for instance, Oxfam, Royal National Lifeboat Institute, the RBL, SAFA, all those sort of people's turns up as well. So we'll be talking about that next week on the show. Don't forget, Tuesday is the quiz. This coming week, 14th of February, is going to be around the old the Valentines and the 14th of February. So yeah, I won't give too much away, but it should be a really good quiz because the Duchess put it together. I didn't put this one together. She done it. She's a romantic type. So until next week then, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for your comments. If you know somebody that might benefit from the show that hasn't seen it, please get them to watch it on a catch up, on a replay. So until next week, TTFN. Ta-ta for now.